mis abuelos me enseñaron desde niña a cuidar el río. Yo viví en la orilla del río Magdalena, que es el corazón de Colombia.
Nearly 1,000 miles long, the River Magdalena is Colombia's lifeblood.
Siempre en mi corazón ha estado ese amor por el río y vivir cerca.
Its wetlands are a haven for wildlife. But endangered animals are dying.
Es muy triste ver la masacre de toda la fauna que aquí muere repetitivamente.
Rising temperatures and pollution are damaging the river.
Para nosotros es triste que mueran todas estas especies porque nos están acabando.
The river ecosystem is under stress because of climate change.
La vida de mi papá ha cambiado mucho. Cada vez hay menos biodiversidad en el río.
Now, a whistleblower shares evidence that Colombia's biggest oil company has polluted the River Magdalena.
For me, the breaking point was really looking at the people that live next to this, really living the impacts of this.
We expose the price of speaking out.
En la noche llegan dos hombres a mi casa, armados, entran sin mediar palabra y me dicen, usted está muy linda, sería una lástima que algo le pasara.
And the ex-CEO hits back.
Colombia ha tenido, digamos, una situación de violencia y de terrorismo muy difícil. Los oleoductos, infraestructura petrolera ha sido blanco de ataques.
Better?
Yeah.
In the caste system of Colombia, I'm a low class. My grandma was a farmer, but not the farmer from movies. She struggled a lot to give the stuff she gave to my dad. And my dad as well, for me to get what I get. For 5 years, I studied petroleum engineering in the State University, and I always wanted to join the company. So getting the job at Ecopetrol was a dream come true. I was extremely proud. My family was super proud as well.
Hay muchos tipos de energía. Lo importante es usarla para hacer cosas buenas.
Usemos nuestra energía para construir un país de todos para todos. Ecopetrol.
Ecopetrol advertises sustainability and jobs. It's Colombia's biggest company, majority owned by the government. Ecopetrol's main base is here in Barranca Bermeja, Colombia's oil capital in the Magdalena Medio. It owns the majority of oil infrastructure in the region. But this is a dangerous place to operate. It's long been a hotspot for violence in Colombia's armed conflict. Today, illegal armed groups are still active in the area.
Barranca Bermeja cierra el 2024 con un alarmante incremento en hechos violentos. El aumento, según cifras, es del 31% en los homicidios.
Andrés Olarte saw a career with Ecopetrol as an opportunity for a better life.
I was in these young professional programs called Semillero de Talentos. I was recruited through my university. My role in Ecopetrol was as advisor of the CEO, who was the former Ministry of Finances of Colombia, as well as being advisor to the Vice President of Sustainability. It was a wonderful position to have at such a young age.
Though 88% owned by the state, Ecopetrol is run like a private corporation and is listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Andrés started his role in 2017. He soon became concerned about the company's approach to the environment.
I first realized that something was wrong very early on.
One of his first tasks was to compile data on wastewater discharges from Ecopetrol's refinery into the Magdalena River.
I remember doing some analysis of water discharges, and it was awful. Most of the water that is put there is really outside the norm of water quality regulation in Colombia. This has a lot of health implications for the communities and the people that use this water downstream. I was handing all the info to my superior saying, these are the results. Isn't this like really wrong? Isn't this illegal? Can we do something to improve this? But then those questions would trigger not only this reaction of like, you're not getting this, you're not getting what the job is about. Why are you asking these questions?
Fishing the Magdalena River has always been a fundamental part of life in Barranca Bermeja.
Como comunidad de pescadores, somos esas guardianas y esos guardianes de los ríos, de las ciénagas, porque de esto depende que podamos llevar alimento a nuestros hogares. Soy Julia Andrea Velázquez, soy una mujer pescadora y pertenezco a la Federación de Pescadores de Santander, FEDEPESAN. Soy la presidenta.
Many in the fishing community here have been raising the alarm about a disturbing trend.
Es muy triste ver la masacre de toda la fauna que aquí muere repetitivamente. Encontramos 3 manatíes, 5 búfalos muertos, encontramos más de 10 babillas, encontramos tortugas, chigüiros, aves, miles de peces muertos. Entonces es algo extraño lo que aquí sucede en este caño.
Yo soy de familia pescadora. Toda mi familia siempre ha pescado en el río.
Juvelis Morales grew up in a fishing town downriver from Barranca Bermeja.
La vida de mi papá ha cambiado mucho. Cada vez hay menos biodiversidad en el río. Día con día, física y emocionalmente, para ellos es más pesado cargar sus canoas con sus redes, con lo que sea, para irse a pescar largas jornadas y regresar sin nada. Y eso complejizaba mucho incluso mi situación escolar, ¿no? Porque mi papá no tenía para comprarme los zapatos, los mejores zapatos o los mejores cuadernos, los que olían rico. Pues a mí me tocaba un cuaderno normal. Y hablando de la vida de los hijos de los pescadores, era bastante dura. Una vez en el colegio llega como un equipo de Ecopetrol y entonces empiezan a decirnos entre tantas cosas que nosotros teníamos que estudiar para poder trabajar en Ecopetrol, que teníamos que tener una mejor calidad de vida, que teníamos entonces que tener nuestra aspiración mayor. Yo siempre he sido como bien alebrestada, entonces yo me paro así un poquito muy brava y yo en el colegio pues era como no, si yo tengo mi dignidad intacta porque yo soy hija de mi papá. En esta región somos más que el petróleo. En esta región no tomamos petróleo, no comemos petróleo. Sufrimos a cuestas tener petróleo.
Many in the fishing community here feel they are paying a double price for the oil industry. Scientists say climate change combined with the El Niño effect is lowering water levels. Pollution is another factor. The fishers say contamination from Ecopetrol's refinery discharges directly into the surrounding waterways.
Como pueden ver, cómo sale el material vegetal de este caño impregnado de aceite.
Aquí podemos observar el brillo que tiene este material vegetal y el aceite que aquí lleva, vean. Todo esto son puras grasas y residuos directamente de la industria de la refinería de Ecopetrol.
Ecopetrol told the BBC that at the time Andrés Olarte's analysis was done, it was legally transitioning to new water discharge standards and now has efficient wastewater systems. But as Andrés continued at Ecopetrol in 2018, he gained access to confidential evidence that wastewater pollution was not the only problem.
There is a database that could only be accessed at the very senior level, and only certain vice presidents could access it, like the vice president of sustainability or the CEO. I was able to access these databases because of the role I had.
Andrés shared this data with the NGO Environmental Investigation Agency and then with the BBC. The BBC has verified the data came from Ecopetrol's servers. In one database, the company records thousands of violations of Colombia's environmental laws and regulations.
Everything related to environment, air, methane emissions, water contamination, deforestation, etc.
Another database lists hundreds of sites polluted with oil, including water sources and wetlands around the country.
You could see a category in the Excel where it lists which one is hidden from an authority and which one is not, which shows kind of the process of hiding stuff from the government.
Around 20% of the polluted sites are marked as being only known to Ecopetrol. The BBC was able to film at one of these sites 7 years later.
By Colombian law, you need to report immediately environmental impact to the authority, immediately. Like if it happens, like if I spill something, I have to report it right away. That's part of every regulation.
And his alarm grew after he visited the site of a major oil spill by the company.
For me, the breaking point was when I had to go to this place that is where I'm from, Barranca Bermeja. And then I was able to witness for the first time what that data I was working with looked like in real life. Really looking at the people that live next to this. When I returned to Bogota, I started collecting information, documenting this, and I had a very clear goal of taking this information and telling the story of the people that were being affected and really living the impacts of this.
The Ecopetrol database records 839 oil-polluted sites called unresolved environmental impacts, some not fully cleaned up after a decade or more. 61 are in the Palagua oil field in the wetlands of the Magdalena Medio. The land belongs to a farmer, Wilson Valencia.
El sueño de mi padre era tener una finca. Trabajó día y noche, 80 años de trabajo de mi padre, y nos dejó este patrimonio a toda la familia. Esta tierra para mí es mi vida.
Not long after the family established the farm, oil was discovered. In exchange for a fee, the family were legally obliged to allow drilling for oil. For nearly 40 years, this oil field has been run by Ecopetrol, for the last 25 through a subcontractor.
Esta es una zona de contaminación permanente de hace más de 20 años que tenemos acá, donde permanentemente está emanando hidrocarburo. Es la mamá de todas las contaminaciones.
Ecopetrol says the damage was done before it acquired the oil field and that it has tried to remediate the pollution. Wilson Valencia says Ecopetrol's attempts to fix the problems have made them worse.
Como podemos observar, esta parte es más alta, la parte que vemos al fondo es más baja. Ellos primero remedian la parte más baja, espera que esto vuelva y fluya el hidrocarburo, se rebosa, sale el hidrocarburo hacia la parte de abajo y vuelven y contaminan la parte más baja. Y en este círculo vicioso se le han pasado ya más de 20 años haciendo esta operación. Este es hidrocarburo, puro hidrocarburo. Así está todo este suelo lleno de crudo, cómo pasa por el subsuelo, se sigue desplazando a este nivel. A pesar de que tenemos mucha agua en el territorio, estas aguas no son aptas para el consumo humano, no son aptas para el uso agrícola ni para el uso pecuario. Es triste ver que tenemos tanta agua, pero agua contaminada. Esta contaminación nos afecta a toda la comunidad, porque al no tener agua limpia, apta para nuestra actividad agropecuaria, no tenemos nada.
The Ecopetrol database shows 31 oil-polluted sites in the wetlands near Barranca Bermeja.
El monitoreo comunitario que realizamos desde Fedepesan consiste en que le enseñé a los pescadores identificar los puntos donde vemos mayor contaminación.
Julie Velázquez and her colleagues have been working with Colombian scientists at the Humboldt Institute to monitor the water and alert other fishers of problems.
Llegamos al punto, identificamos si hay fauna muerta, si hay peces muertos. Con unas tirillas podemos realizar la muestra de tomar el pH. Con otras tirillas que tenemos, miramos todos los metales pesados que allí se presentan. Y lo que hacemos es que con el gotero empezamos a colocarle un poquito de agua a cada uno de los cuadritos. Aquí tenemos los metales pesados que nos permite mirar el pH y la acidez. Esto lo que hace es que nos da unas indicaciones de que en estos momentos aquí en Caño Rosario está realmente dentro de los metales pesados, están bastante alterados. Estos son unas pruebas básicas que nos indican a nosotros y nos alertan que algo está mal aquí en Caño Rosario.
The study, published by the Humboldt Institute, showed 2/3 of the points tested in the wetlands had high levels of heavy metals. Ecopetrol denied knowledge of this study. Felipe Bayón was CEO of Ecopetrol from 2017 to 2023. He has agreed to answer questions about the company's record during his time there.
Es el grupo empresarial más grande del país. En un año puede ser entre el 10 y el 15% de los ingresos del presupuesto de la nación. Entonces, desde el punto de vista económico es importante, desde el punto de vista de seguridad y soberanía energética es muy importante, desde el punto de vista social, de transformación de vidas, es muy importante.
It was during Felipe Bayón's time as CEO that Andrés Olarte collected most of his data. Olarte was working for the Vice President of Sustainability. Bayón denies there was a policy of hiding unresolved oil pollution.
Tengo bastante buena memoria, Owen, y no me acuerdo haber visto el documento. Entonces, por eso te digo con tranquilidad absoluta que no hay o no hubo en ese momento ninguna política o ninguna instrucción diciendo, oiga, estas cosas no se pueden contar. Si hubo algo de este estilo, claramente no obedece a una instrucción desde la parte alta de la compañía o desde la dirección de la compañía.
Felipe Bayón blamed unresolved oil pollution on a factor beyond the company's control: sabotage by illegal armed groups.
Colombia ha tenido, digamos, una situación de violencia y de terrorismo muy difícil. Desde los años 80, los oleoductos, infraestructura petrolera ha sido blanco de ataques. De hecho, veía que en estos últimos meses se han incrementado el número de ataques. Y como resultado de muchos de esos ataques hay derrames.
Felipe Bayón was questioned by director Owen Pinell.
While it's true that some of those incidents in the table which says attacks or thefts, that's only 50 of the 839 in the table. So obviously many more of them are from operational failures or obsolete infrastructure and so on. So this is something which Ecopetrol can be directly responsible for. How do you account for those incidents?
Miremos cómo era el 2018, cómo fue el 2019, el 20, 21, 22, porque yo creo que hubo un avance significativo en resolver problemas de integridad, en resolver problemas de emisiones.
But the BBC obtained figures from the Colombian environmental regulator showing that Ecopetrol has recorded hundreds of oil spills a year since 2020. Felipe Bayón says that he personally ordered the cleanup of the Palagua oil field on farmer Wilson Valencia's land.
Yo me acuerdo que de manera muy vehemente les dije, el tema de Palagua tenemos que resolverlo. Y en el caso, por ejemplo, de remediación de tierra, land remediation, había 75 de estos aspectos ambientales no resueltos y para ese momento, para el momento en que se hizo la revisión, se habían ya resuelto el 85%.
Ecopetrol's records show progress, but the BBC has seen correspondence from the environmental regulator saying none of the unresolved oil pollution had been remediated as of August 2024. Satellite images show that areas of visible pollution on Wilson's land have grown in recent years. Back in 2018, Andrés Solarte's position at Ecopetrol was becoming untenable.
Unfortunately, while I was still in the company, Ecopetrol found out that I was collecting information. And then on a more personal level, the company culture is quite toxic. It was so hard for me to handle, especially because I was quite young. And that led to me leaving the company.
Andrés left in January 2019 and started looking for work. He moved to his family home near Barranca Bermeja and met with an old contact to ask about job openings. He thinks he was being watched. He received an anonymous call.
I returned to my home in my parents' house, and I received a call. In the call, I understood that they thought I had put complaints against Ecopetrol, which was not the case. That was the first death threat I received.
He doesn't know who was behind the threats, which continued.
Lots of death threats to me and to my family. The caliber of the threats and these calls started being really difficult to handle.
One threat was in the form of a letter, which he showed the BBC.
So I had to leave Colombia and come to Berlin. Many, many times I look back and I regret asking those questions. I regret asking those basic questions. Oh.
Since leaving the country, Andrés has been in a series of legal cases against Ecopetrol and its management. which are unresolved.
Mr. Olarte told us that after he left the company, he was threatened. I just want to ask if you believe that whistleblower protections were upheld during your time at Ecopetrol.
Owen, tuvimos muchos casos en los que whistleblowers entregaron información y se les hizo el seguimiento adecuado. Primero, pues me estoy enterando por ustedes que el señor Olarte tuvo problemas de seguridad, amenazas, inclusive, y lo cual rechazo y lamento profundamente. Eso es algo que es absolutamente inaceptable, absolutamente inaceptable.
Once he and his family were safely out of the country, Andrés tried to raise the alarm. He contacted the NGO Environmental Investigation Agency in Washington, D.C.
My name's Alexander von Bismarck. I'm the executive director at the Environmental Investigation Agency. We are an organization that looks to investigate environmental crime around the world and to suggest and implement solutions. We received an email from Andrés in 2021. It was a very large set of files and folders that it turned out to recount an extraordinary number of what appeared to be environmental crimes, really the size of which and the detail of which we had never seen. I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I had never come across anything like it. After looking at it in detail, we really had very little doubts about its veracity. And so in that context, we thought it was important to try to bring additional expertise and additional data to what he really laid out in great detail.
One key piece of evidence Andrés shared with the EIA was on Ecopetrol's methane emissions.
Methane is a greenhouse gas that is much more dangerous and much more harmful to the climate and environment. So, like, releasing methane is much more dangerous than releasing, for example, CO2.
Methane venting is the intentional release of the gas into the atmosphere. It's illegal in Colombia except in a very few circumstances. Andrés suspected the company was illegally venting. He secretly recorded a colleague talking about it. We've changed the colleague's voice to conceal their identity.
Sí, pero no es real. Es un dato que en Ecopetrol oficialmente te lo den tantos. Supuestamente encontrar muchas fuentes que se llaman gas venteado en pozo. Cero. No digamos lo que está reportando. No, pero somos la maravilla, pues por aquí no ventamos. No sabemos que no es real. Hay otros venteos, porque esto es realidad. Entonces estamos hablando de que se reportaban en esta radio y venteos. Podría ser nosotros.
The EIA set out to verify whether Ecopetrol was still venting methane using a special camera which reveals the usually invisible gas.
2 NGOs had already done this in 2019 to check with that technology where the emissions were occurring in Ecopetrol's various processes. And we thought it was interesting to, and very important, to ground truth that and see if it was happening today.
This footage was published in 2019 by NGOs Earthworks and CHRE. It shows illegal venting at a number of sites. Felipe Bayón told us this footage changed the company's approach to methane reduction.
Cuando nosotros vimos esas filmaciones que eran de la sociedad civil, inclusive algunas ONGs, yo te digo, yo pensé, esto es un regalo para nosotros. Entonces, ahí, Owen, empezamos un proceso súper riguroso. Te decía, hubo más de 500 fugas de metano que fueron en su momento corregidas, donde se cambiaron sellos, donde inclusive muchos de esos tanques salieron de servicio.
But when the EIA went back in 2023 with Earthworks, they found there were still problems. This footage of the Barranca Bermeja refinery shows continuous plumes of methane. Experts have told the BBC that these clips show routine venting from gas wells, which is illegal in Colombia. Felipe Bayón was still in charge when this footage was recorded.
So the initial footage was taken in 2019, the follow-up footage was taken in February 2023. 11 of those sites were still emitting methane. So why do you think that the problem doesn't appear to have been solved?
Sí, y puede, Owen, que sea una muestra particular donde efectivamente haya temas que todavía tengan que ser resueltos. No digo que no.
We showed some of this footage to some independent experts, and they told us that some of this actually shows routine venting, which, as you know, is illegal.
Ecopetrol pues tiene la data, tiene la información. Yo creo que es relevante pues tener esa conversación nuevamente con Ecopetrol.
We put the evidence of continued illegal methane emissions to Ecopetrol. It said it is on track to meet methane reduction targets as part of an industry-leading strategy. The EIA also followed up Andrés' evidence on pollution of the Magdalena Medio. They commissioned a scientific survey.
So we went to the toxicology unit in Cartagena University to look at what was actually in the environment vis-a-vis those contaminants. The contaminants of greatest concern are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and heavy metals, which are both associated with oil and gas production and refining. And so the lead scientists at Cartagena University took sediment samples, particularly to see the prevalence of those chemicals.
En el 2023 desarrollamos un estudio preliminar en sedimentos de diferentes humedales del municipio de Puerto Wilches y de Barranca Bermeja. La mayoría de los sitios que evaluamos estaban contaminados con hidrocarburos aromáticos polinucleares.
These chemicals, known as PAHs, are potentially cancer-causing. The scientists found traces they attributed to Ecopetrol's oil refinery.
Lo que vimos es que en un radio de 50, 60, 100 kilómetros puede haber algún tipo de impacto directo de esta actividad industrial. Esos hidrocarburos aromáticos polinucleares pueden pasar de los sedimentos a la biota. Y como nosotros consumimos un buen número de especies de la biota, particularmente peces, es posible entonces la transferencia de esos contaminantes a los humanos.
Ecopetrol told us that another study found that levels of PAHs were below the detection limit in the area. Neither study has been peer-reviewed or published. The BBC has spoken to a senior local doctor who says environmental problems damaged children's health.
Durante 28 años desarrollé mi carrera profesional en la ciudad de Barranca Bermeja, como médico general, después como pediatra y después como el jefe de la primera unidad de cuidado intensivo neonatal de mi ciudad.
Dr. Yesid Blanco thought water pollution was a major factor in his patients' illnesses.
Los problemas relacionados con la contaminación en mi ciudad son evidentes. Uno notaba pacientes con cuadros de diarrea crónica, pacientes que tenían problemas de mala absorción intestinal, problemas de desnutrición, problemas de anemia, problemas en la piel asociados con la exposición al agua. Y lo digo porque habían pacientes de mi ciudad que una vez se iban de nuestra ciudad mejoraban prácticamente del todo. De todos en Barranca Bermeja era sabido la calidad del agua prácticamente negra.
A 2019 study by regional authorities found high levels of toxic heavy metals in the city's reservoirs. Dr. Yesid started noticing children being born with birth defects, including anencephaly, a terminal condition.
Tuvimos un clúster de pacientes con anencefalia. Aproximadamente 5 niños nacieron en mi ciudad y dada la incidencia y la prevalencia de esta enfermedad era una tasa muy alta para una ciudad tan pequeña como mi ciudad. En la anencefalia el desarrollo de los bebés no se produce. Nacen con un cerebro muy pequeño o simplemente no está el cerebro. Los niños nacen vivos, pero unas horas después fallecen por causas asociadas a su deterioro neurológico.
Experts told the BBC that anencephaly can have a number of causes, but there is a known risk when babies are exposed to heavy metals in the womb.
La explicación para la presencia de metales pesados se da básicamente porque durante muchos años la industria petrolera hizo vertimientos inadvertidos a las fuentes de agua. La otra fuente importante para la contaminación del agua de la ciudad fue un relleno sanitario que fue localizado en la zona protegida que da al agua de la ciudad.
A local company established the landfill in 2015 in a previously protected area of the wetlands near Barranca Bermeja. The feasibility study into whether this site was suitable for a large waste facility was mostly paid for by Ecopetrol.
El relleno sanitario recibe la basura de la ciudad de Barranca Bermeja y de unos municipios aledaños, pero también contratistas de Ecopetrol están arrojando las basuras ahí. De hecho, fue confirmado por la Corte Constitucional en Colombia.
In 2019, French company Veolia bought the landfill, promising to clean up practices at the site. But local environmentalists say these videos show potentially toxic discharge overflowing into local water sources. Veolia says its landfill has processed thousands of tons of waste from Ecopetrol, but that dangerous oil waste is disposed of at a different site.
Una vez encontramos estos impactos medioambientales en la ciudad de Barranca Bermeja, iniciamos un proceso, una estrategia legal denunciando esto a nivel de las cortes.
Dr. Yesid's court case was against Veolia, Ecopetrol, and the local water company. It was dismissed on procedural grounds. Shortly after, he was named in a paramilitary leaflet as a target.
La decisión de salir de Colombia al exilio fue tomada en el momento en que yo me enteré de los sicarios contratados para matarme a mí o a mi familia.
Tuve que abandonar Colombia porque ya no podía caminar la calle con el miedo de ser asesinado o de que mi familia fuera asesinada. Yo entendí Ecopetrol desde adentro. Había un sistema para hacer monitoreo de personas que se opusieran a la industria, viendo su presencia en redes sociales, qué tipo de tweets hacían, qué ponían en Facebook. También, digamos, revisaban los antecedentes de esta persona, quién era su familia, si de pronto tenía algo que se pudiera utilizar en su contra. Y se hablaba de ellos como un problema de la misma manera que se hablaba de cualquier problema de la operación.
The BBC has verified internal emails and screenshots of a digital monitoring system tracking 1,200 key actors, including environmental groups and indigenous communities.
Y en Colombia hay crimen muy organizado, mucho de eso gracias a la historia que tenemos. Y si uno ve el histórico de personas que han sido asesinadas, muchos de ellos se estaban oponiendo a proyectos de Ecopetrol y de la industria petrolera.
An armed conflict between left-wing guerrilla groups, the government, and right-wing paramilitaries has been fought in Colombia for more than 60 years, killing at least 450,000 people.
Colombia's oil industry has for decades been entangled in the armed conflict.
Matt Smith is an oil analyst and financial journalist who has been based in Colombia for 14 years. He has reported how the oil industry in Barranca Bermeja became a flashpoint in the conflict. It was a stronghold for left-wing guerrilla groups, FARC and ELN.
It reached a point where both the ELN and the FARC, which was the major guerrilla group until their surrender in 2016, the ability to extract huge sums of money and generate tremendous income by extorting from oil companies and kidnapping their employees, and even bombing and attacking wellheads.
The army turned to the biggest paramilitary group at the time, the AUC, to defeat the guerrillas. On May 16, 1998, paramilitary groups killed 7 civilians and abducted 25 more from the streets of Barranca Bermeja. These 25 were disappeared and their bodies have never been found. Many more civilian deaths followed in what was called the Barranca Bermeja takeover.
The paramilitaries were basically given a free hand by the government to root out guerrillas, guerrilla supporters, and that included anyone who were viewed to be leftist, subversives. So whether that be union leaders, whether that be human rights workers, community leaders who were simply opposed to oil industry operations.
As part of the peace agreement between the Colombian government and the FARC in 2016, a special court was set up to investigate all sides of the conflict and bring justice for victims. In 2023, new allegations brought Ecopetrol's historical record into the courtroom.
A lot of information has come out of the tribunal relating to the involvement of paramilitaries with Ecopetrol.
Salvatore Mancuso, former AUC commander, gave evidence. He alleged that Ecopetrol paid the group for its services in oil.
Ecopetrol permitía que nosotros extrajéramos del oleoducto combustible y no suspendían el bombeo de combustible. Nosotros pudimos financiarnos a través de Ecopetrol.
In May 2024, the court heard allegations that Ecopetrol conspired with the army and the AUC in the Barranca Bermeja takeover.
A former army captain by the name of Jose Gonzalez admitted to working for Ecopetrol as a senior security manager. And he alleged that he acted as a key conduit between senior security management at Ecopetrol and paramilitaries, providing instructions to them as to who was to be murdered, who was to be intimidated, and who was to be kidnapped.
Ecopetrol denies the allegations and says it is fully cooperating with the inquiry to establish the facts. The court's spokesperson told the BBC it is still investigating the role of state security forces and Ecopetrol officials and expects a key ruling by the end of 2025. Paramilitaries remain powerful in Barranca Bermeja, despite the AUC officially demobilizing.
Demobilization was heavily flawed, and closure was never given to paramilitary victims, and the paramilitaries never really demobilized. You have the Gulf Clan, which is known by its Spanish acronym, the AGC. They have now emerged as the most powerful armed group in Colombia.
Today, Colombia is the most dangerous country in the world for environmental activists. Based on data from NGO Global Witness, a record 79 were killed in 2023.
El principio de mi activismo yo no sé si existe porque yo no sé si yo soy activista. A mí me gusta más pensar que soy una defensora, ¿no? Una defensora y una cuidadora del río.
Aged 18, Yubelis Morales led protests against Ecopetrol's plans to start fracking in the Magdalena Medio for the first time in Colombia. Fracking is controversial here. Many fear a heavy environmental impact.
El fracking en Colombia no se va a dar, y no se va a dar porque no es una lucha contra el fracking, es una lucha por la vida de todos y todas.
Her protests soon attracted unwanted attention.
En la noche llegan 2 hombres a mi casa, armados, entran sin mediar palabra, me tocan el cabello de una manera sediciosa, asquerosa. y me dicen, usted está muy linda, sería una lástima que algo le pasara. Deje de joder con eso del fracking que la vamos a matar. Yo me quedé así. Ellos demostraban que podían hacerme cualquier cosa y yo no iba a hacer nada, no podía hacer nada. Eran dos tipos.
Julie Velázquez, head of the fishing union, has received repeated death threats. Last year, the Gulf Plan, or AGC, declared Julie's union Fede Pesan a military target. The group fired warning shots at her home and told her to leave. The government had provided her with bodyguards in 2022, but she has continued to be the target of multiple armed attacks.
Son personas que tienen mucho poder, tienen dinero, tienen cómo quitar al que denuncia del medio. Es muy preocupante realmente. Ese es el temor que tengo también, porque por nosotros levantar la voz como mujer pescadora, ese es el temor que me da, que me asesinen, para que esta mujer pescadora no siga denunciando todo lo que se ha visto en los diferentes humedales y caños de Barranca Bermeja.
Ponche negra, camiseta blanca, camiseta rosada.
Tonight, Julie's bodyguards are concerned about two suspicious men circling her house on a motorbike.
Los hombres se percatan que los dos escoltas están afuera y dan la vuelta y bajan, o sea, están observando todo el movimiento porque ya habían bajado por la otra cuadra hacia los negocios. O sea, ya han merodeado la zona. De esa forma se manejan los sicariatos acá en Barranca Bermeja. El hecho de sentir en todo momento que te persiguen es algo que no te deja dormir, ni a mí ni a mis hijos.
Farmer Wilson Valencia has had a number of legal disputes with Ecopetrol and its subcontractors. He says he has been threatened and intimidated by armed, masked men.
Yo fui visitado y hostigado en mi casa de habitación en Puerto Boyacá por 4 hombres en 2 motos con arma en mano. Esa situación se sorteó y es ahí cuando la Unidad Nacional de Protección me asigna un hombre de protección.
The government has advised Wilson to leave his farm for his own safety. He refused.
Mi padre siempre me argumentó, el día que ustedes vendan la tierra, se vayan de la finca, están comprando la ruina y la desgracia de la familia.
The private security sector in Colombia has grown significantly and it can be a source of problems.
The overlap between private security companies and paramilitaries or former paramilitaries is immense. Obviously, when you have thousands of men who once carried firearms and had been involved in active military operations and potentially even combat against leftist guerrillas, now unemployed, they're going to need to find a job. With their skill sets, private security is the most logical step. And then the problem you have is those private security companies seek out the most lucrative contracts. The most lucrative contracts tend to be the oil industry, and it tends to be Ecopetrol issuing most of those contracts.
Andrés Olarte has shared internal Ecopetrol emails showing that in 2018 it paid a total of $65 million to over 2,800 private security companies.
I would honestly put my hand on my heart and say that senior management within Ecopetrol would not have been involved in ordering those paramilitaries to their facilities or near their facilities in 2021 onwards. But there is always that risk of some sort of contagion between the private security companies, the types of people they employ, and their desire to continually maintain their contract. It could include potentially even kidnapping or murdering community leaders or environmental defenders operating in those areas simply to get rid of the problem and ensure that Ecopetrol's operations proceed smoothly
Including the contributors in this film, the BBC has spoken to 9 people who have criticized Ecopetrol and later received death threats from illegal armed groups or anonymously.
Está armado, que el tipo está armado, entonces la gente tiene miedo para que nos colabore.
In recent years, 4 union members working for Ecopetrol or a subcontractor have been killed. 3 were murdered by illegal armed groups, while the other case remains unsolved. Ecopetrol emails revealed by Andrés show annual payments worth $29 million to law enforcement and armed forces. Private sector funding like this is legal, but civil society groups say it creates a conflict of interest.
Primero te diría, yo sí creo que teníamos la debida diligencia, los controles, en los convenios con la fuerza militar, y lo mismo se hizo con todas las compañías de seguridad. Ecopetrol, que tenía en su momento 18,000 empleados, y en algún momento tuvimos más de 120,000, 130,000 contratistas, pues es una operación grande y compleja, pero yo estoy convencido que los controles y la debida diligencia estaba ahí. Y cuando sucedía algo, bueno, que estuviera por fuera del estándar, de la regulación, nosotros éramos, o las expectativas inclusive, del código de ética y de cumplimiento de la compañía, nosotros éramos los primeros en reportar esto a las autoridades.
We, as a documentary team, have spoken with 9 people who've told us of credible threats which they link to them publicly criticizing Ecopetrol.
Rechazo categóricamente esas amenazas. Y quiero dejar total claridad en este espacio que me dan, que nunca y en ningún momento hubo ninguna directriz en ese sentido. De hecho, yo he sido muy vocal en términos de acabar con la polarización que tiene el país, de acabar con esas enemistades que no nos llevan a nada.
In 2022, Colombia elected its first left-wing president, Gustavo Petro, a former guerrilla. He criticized Ecopetrol's record and accused it of using billions of dollars of public funds to finance people, paramilitaries, and politics. In 2022, at climate conference COP28, President Petro announced that Colombia would transition away from fossil fuels.
Estamos ante una confrontación del capital fósil y la vida humana. Y por tanto, como presidente de la República de Colombia, no me cabe ninguna duda de cuál posición tomar. La posición es al lado de la vida.
President Petro has banned fracking and stopped new oil contracts, but he's faced criticism for jeopardizing the country's economy and energy security. In 2023, Felipe Bayón resigned and President Petro appointed a political ally as CEO of Ecopetrol.
Antes de salir, me preguntaban, ¿usted qué le diría al presidente Petro? Y yo decía que cuide a Ecopetrol. Y eso tal vez es lo más importante. Hoy en Colombia tenemos 1.5 millones de familias que no tienen acceso a la energía o que cocinan con leña y con carbón. En ese contexto, yo creo que hay que seguir apostándole a la producción limpia de petróleo, de gas, de todas las fuentes de energía, a seguir transicionando, pero sin acabar una industria que es tan relevante para los colombianos.
From exile in Germany, Andrés has kept challenging Ecopetrol's environmental record, submitting complaints to the Colombian authorities and the company itself, so far without meaningful results. But he's built a new career working on climate policies.
I never realized how this would completely change my life, like in every sense, professionally, emotionally. But the true motivation comes in saying, we are facing right now a huge problem that is climate change. And maybe it's the time to rethink how to do energy, how to do oil in the country. Not harming communities that have no voice, no political power, no political representation. It's not fair. Sustainability is about environment, but it's about social goals as well.
O sea, démonos cuenta, cómo es que acá a 30 minutos en Barrancabermeja tenemos una refinería que está quemando diariamente. ¿Cómo vamos no a pensar nosotros y a estar seguros que extraerle a la tierra todos los días, a cada minuto, no es una causa de la crisis ambiental y climática que tenemos hoy en el mundo?
President Petro's government has promised to protect environmentalists, but Juvelis has received more threats. And in October 2024, another local woman who opposed fracking was killed by the AGC. For her own safety, Juvelis can only visit home briefly.
Hoy me siento muy feliz. Abrazar a mi familia, ver a las niñas, regresar. Se siente muy bien. Es como un respiro al alma. Yo soy el vivo ejemplo de que la vida persiste. Yo soy vida en este Magdalena. Y este Magdalena me dio y me da vida a mí también. Así que estoy muy bien. Eso.